I'm a neurobiologist by trade. One of my students a week ago asked me if I've been doing that all my life, and of course the appropriate answer is not yet. Neurobiologists are an odd lot, and I can possibly describe that best by recounting a lecture I attended about 5 years ago at the biology department at the University of Washington. It was a lecture to us on how to talk to people who didn't accept evolution. And the person giving the lecture said, well, the way to do that is to circumscribe what science can do and what it can't do. And he said, well, the first example I would give you is that neurobiology will never be able to tell us why certain people find the music of Bach so beautiful. And I annoyed him by raising my hand and said, are you sure about that? Because it may not be true. Because 20 years ago, if someone had come up to me and said, we're going to study human consciousness at the single cell level, at the physiological level, I think people would look at that person like, nod and smile and maybe need a long vacation to get away from things. No longer true. The progress of the last 10 to 15 years in neurobiology is approaching probably the most intractable problem in science, which is who we are and how this 3-pound lump of jello-like substance inside our skulls actually creates a phenomenon of consciousness. The progress has been astonishing. And it is no longer considered a non-scientific discipline. And what I'd like to do today is to share with you some aspects of the progress that has been made in understanding the biology of human consciousness. And these are the big principles I'd like to talk about today. First, the brain is the seat of consciousness. That's not too controversial. I'll talk for a minute about the history of that concept. Number two, the brain is a lot more complicated than you think. The third thing I talk about is one of the most important here, is that your senses, vision and hearing, are not there to report the world as it is. And it's actually fun to talk right after a photographer about vision. Your senses are there for one purpose, to distort the world in order to keep you alive. Number four, another surprising outcome of the last 10 years or so is that you don't actually have to perceive something to act on it. And you'll see some astonishing data along those lines in a few minutes. And 5 and 6, very closely related concepts. The brain is divided into very specific areas that subserve very complex functions in consciousness. And disease or stimulation of small brain areas can take those away from you very specifically in really quite surprising ways. So let's begin a long time ago with Hippocrates. Up until Hippocrates started thinking about it, the question of the disease known as epilepsy, it was thought to be a divine disease given to people by God. Now Hippocrates argued against that. He never called it the sacred disease. In fact, explicitly said he wouldn't. And he used the term great disease. And by the way, that comes to us today in the term grand mal, epilepsy, the great disease. And he said, well, the reason we think epilepsy is a gift from God and so spooky is just we don't have the experience to understand something that happens in the brain. And the same thing can be said for the idea of consciousness. We think it's something unusual and spooky because we just don't understand the brain well enough yet. And there's one special thing about studying the brain that my students are often bothered by at the university, is that it's a recursive endeavor. For example, I spent about a week in my class talking about the molecules in the brain that are involved in learning. And inevitably, a student will raise their hand sometime before the exam and say, so how should I study this? And I remind them that when they're learning this material, they're using the molecules involved in learning in order to learn about the molecules involved in learning. And this disturbs the students a lot. And I said, well, really, it should make it easy to do well in the exam. Of course, it doesn't. But you're using the organ you're studying to study the organ that you're studying. And this is quite a special problem in all of science. It makes neurobiology quite a unique endeavor. The brain is enormously complicated. Inside your skull are approximately 86 billion neurons, nerve cells. In a presidential election year and in the aftermath of an election, these numbers don't mean anything. It sounds like a tax cut at the cost of a war or something. But I challenge you to be impressed by that number. Count them. Your homework is due today. I'm going to allow you to count them once per second, 24/7, here. When did you have to start your homework to get all those neurons counted and turn it into data? And the answer, I think, is very surprising for many people. 710 BC. Take you almost 3,000 years counting 1 per second to count the neurons inside your head. Founding of Rome about then, your local poet was Homer. You could have bought a book of his poems, but oh wait, no, the printing press wouldn't be invented for another 2,000 years. This is an extraordinary complex structure. By the way, you made those neurons in 3 months. At the peak of building of neurons, when you were in utero, you were cranking out 250,000 of them per minute. That's why Mom was so hungry. Actually, that's exactly why. Okay, let's talk about the senses a little bit now, especially about vision. Your visual system was not created by those nice camera engineers that our previous speaker talked about. It was created by evolution. And it was created for one purpose: to keep you alive long enough to mate. So there's no reason to think that your senses should report the world as it is. They report a very distorted version of the world in order to keep you alive. And here are 3 examples that we'll go through with some very interesting pictures about how that happens. Let's look at your visual system, for example. Your visual system enhances contrast and predicts pattern at the expense of almost entirely giving up your perception of light intensity. You don't see light intensity. You think you do, but you don't, and I'll show you you don't. You create something called color constancy in the world, so that an object of a certain color, when it moves between different sources of light, actually emits very different wavelengths to your eye, but that doesn't do any good. You don't want to be confused by a predator thinking it's not the same object when it's in different light sources. So your brain alters your perception of color to create constancy of color in different light sources, and it makes a lot of mistakes along the way. Maybe most importantly, it fills in missing information by guessing patterns. I don't know how much our previous speaker is willing to spend on camera, but I can tell you your eyes only have about a megapixel going back to your brain. That's a pretty lousy camera. No one would buy one. It fills in. It guesses. It creates things that aren't there in order to make you think you have very good eyes. Every one of these things and many others cause very significant distortions of reality. So let's look at a few of them. I hope the projector will do this. I might actually, is it possible to turn these lights off, these orange things? They're gonna cause havoc in some of these slides. I think we're doing okay with that if we get the lights there. Thanks. I can't see from where you are, so I hope this is working well. I went to a lot of trouble to make this slide because it's not easy in PowerPoint to create these rectangles here. Notice each one has a very smooth gradient from darker to lighter, like that. Not true, I'm terrible at PowerPoint. I didn't create any rectangles that look like that. These rectangles are absolutely uniform in their gray from here to here. They don't get lighter as you go from right to left. As you can, and the reason they appear to in your eyes is that you enhance this line. So because this piece of gray is next to something dark, your brain makes it lighter. Here, it's next to light, your brain makes it darker. And you see more lines that exist there. That's so you can see outlines of predators and stay alive. And you can see this very easily by blacking out the confusing information here. This looks like a very uniform shade of gray, left to right here. All of a sudden it doesn't. That's your eye distorting reality and enhancing contrast. Well, you don't often see something like this in the world, so big deal. But you do often see something like this. It's a chessboard. A little complicated chessboard. It's got a shadow across it, and it's got a cylinder here. And your eye, your brain predict this very nice pattern of a chessboard here because you think you know what you should see. But I think that most of you might be a little distressed if I tell you that the square here labeled A and the square labeled B here are exactly the same shade of gray. That is, A is not darker. And we can show you this by occluding the information. A and B are exactly the same. Now you're very motivated, intelligent people, so now that you know that, I'm sure that you will be able to perceive them as the same when I go backwards here. Let's see how easy that is for you to do. Oh dear. You can't. You can't undo what your brain is doing to predict this pattern. Color constancy, keeping color constant at different illuminations, also creates havoc for you in reporting what's actually in the world. It's a rather complicated figure of sort of a super steroided Rubik's Cube in two different illuminations, yellow and blue. And you have no trouble at all detecting the same pattern of color here in this face of the cube and this face. They look like the same cube. Unfortunately, I would ask you to concentrate on the 4 blue squares right here and the 7 yellow squares right here. Would it disturb you if I told you they were exactly the same color? Let's look. Keep your eye on this blue square right here and this nice yellow square right here. So other than the fact that they're the same and that neither one of them has any color, you did just great. You've worked that reality in quite an extreme way in order to do what your brain predicted you would like to do, which is to understand that these should be the same independent of the light source. So you're not reporting reality. And in fact, if you think hard enough about it, you'll see that in fact there's really very little independent evidence that reality exists at all outside of your brain. This can get very disturbing here. I've got 2 gray squares here. You would not argue with me, I think that they're the same shade of gray, and watch them come down and change color. Well, they didn't. Now they appear to match yellow and blue, although they're not. Even worse, I have a gray square here that I'm just going to slide across, and let's see how you do with keeping it gray. Now that you know that it's going to be gray the whole time. See if you can override your brain's distortion here. Good, gray, uh-oh, blue. Oh, fine, stay blue, no problem. Here, gray, uh-oh, yellow. You completely messed up your perception of reality here. Another thing your brain loves to do to help your vision is to fill things in. It predicts what's there and it fills in the blanks. Works really well usually. No. There's no square in this figure whatsoever. But your brain is making a prediction here. It's very unlikely that there are 4 3/4 circles in the world in this pattern. So your brain says, okay, there aren't. There are 4 circles. And there's a white square laying over them. That's what I'm going to see. To do that, I'm going to fill in a line right here. And I'm going to make this a little bit lighter than this. It's not. There is no square there. And there's almost no way that you can unsee that. Because your brain works with speed and prediction to help keep you alive. And it sacrifices reality while it does that. It helps your brain to know that it's missing things sometimes. If you want to activate this filling in pattern, you can do that in interesting ways. This looks like, somebody broke up an old landline telephone with a hammer and laid it on the table. It's a bunch of pieces. They don't make any sense. But let's spill some ink on them. Telling your brain that there's something missing and activating your brain's ability to fill in the gaps. And watch how quickly you'll see 5 copies of the letter B. B, 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 and B. Even when you know it's there, you can't go back. You can't see it. Your brain's filling in something that doesn't exist and making a very compelling picture of the letter B here because it should be there, not because it's there. Vision isn't the only thing that acts on prediction. Hearing acts on prediction. If you think you know what you're about to hear, you hear it. So I'm going to play, I hope this plays well, a sound clip here. You're going to hear 2 copies of a distorted human voice saying something. And I imagine you will not be able to understand it. Then they're going to play for you the actual recording that was distorted. It's a subway announcement from Washington, D.C. And then they're going to play the original distorted sound again and see how much better you hear it. Oops, I don't know how to do this actually. Let's see. Maybe there's a way for somebody to...
So what you'll hear is a sentence, a spoken sentence, that's been transformed by a computer to sound like gibberish. So...
How you doing?
Any idea what they said?
No.
Okay. You can hear it one more time. Okay, now we'll hear the real sentence.
The Constitution Center is starting next stop.
Does it make sense that time?
Yeah, wait, was that the same?
It's not the same sentence that you heard the first time.
No way.
Yes, it was. I warn you, this is called the sound you can't unhear. That's that sound will now be comprehensible to you for at least 6 months, possibly longer. Because we've set up a set of neural activity in the auditory part of your cortex, and it's looking for that sound in the rotor. When it hears it, it's going to match it. You can't unhear that sound. Sorry. An earworm in the extreme form. Okay, now even more disturbing recent results about your consciousness. You don't have to perceive things to act on. I will show you, for example, if you put your hand on a hot stove and you pull your hand back before you feel the pain, you can locate objects in the world without seeing them. And information goes into your brain, but it's selectively hidden from you. And you can bring it out in certain ways. This is a picture of your spinal cord. Don't do this at home. If you took a sword, cut through your chest here, cut yourself in half, and look down on the spinal cord right here, this is what you see. And in red here is a nerve cell that's encoding pain. Put your hand on the hot stove. This nerve cell tells the nervous system pain. Sends the information to this little nerve cell on the spinal cord here, and it sends information to this black nerve cell, goes out one of your nerves and makes a muscle contract. That's how your hand yanks back from the pain. Never goes to your brain. The nerve cell in the middle here has a branch. It goes all the way up to the brain. So this is the pathway right here within your spinal cord to get away from the pain. This is the pathway to consciously perceive pain. They're in parallel, not in series. You do not feel the pain before you withdraw. You withdraw from the pain way before you feel the pain. Why? Well, it's fast. If you put your hand on the hot stove and waited for your brain to encode pain information, that hand would get burned. So you withdraw before you feel the pain. So why bother to feel the pain at all? Well, 2 reasons. One, this axon goes to the speech centers, a separate speech center from normal speech. It's known as emotive speech. We all call it swearing. This will activate that pathway so you swear. I'm not joking. Also, you learn not to do it again. Let's look, for example, at how vision and information percolates through the brain. Eyes are here in front. This is a color-coded picture of the brain. The details don't matter. Information from the eyes, visual information, ends up first right here in the back of the brain. It's the furthest place away from the eyes. Not very, here I say it, intelligent design. The information then is analyzed and percolates forward through the brain, but it does so in 2 separate parallel paths. Here to the side of the brain for perception, up here at the top of the brain for movement. This is where you consciously see things. This is where you operate on them. Catch a ball, avoid something that's thrown at you. They operate in parallel. Is it possible in a human to take this away and leave this intact? In fact, yes, it's happened. There's a phenomenon known as blind sight. And here's what happens. It's called a posting test because it was done in England. We call it a mailing test. You have a little rotating circle here with a slot in it. You put it at different angles, and you ask people, what's the angle? And you ask them to mail a letter, put this thing in. You only give them one try. They can't feel around for it. They have to get it right just by looking. And here we plot what these people do when you ask them the angle of this slot. And whatever angle it is always plotted vertically. We're looking at the error. A normal person is really good. It tells you exactly what angle the slot is. But now you bring in one of these people that's had a stroke that's destroyed this one piece of the visual system. They think you're stupid for asking. I can't see anything. I'm blind. Why are you asking this stupid question? And sure, they have no idea what angle this thing is at. Now you ask them to mail the letter. And then the person who's blind will say, they get insulted. They'll say, this is stupid. Don't ask me to mail the letter. I can't see this thing. Guess. Okay. They do just as well as the person who can see. These are people who walk into a room and they have to be led around the room a little bit. And you say, go to the table and pick up the ball. And they say, don't talk to me like that. I'm blind. Well, guess. They'll walk right to the table. Their hand will go out. Their hand will pre-size to the size of the ball and pick it up. They're using visual information without being able to consciously see. Now, does this only happen in stroke? Well, you do this all the time. You ever had somebody almost spill a cup of coffee and your hand reaches out and catches it, and you look at your hand like, wow, how'd that happen? You ever had someone pull into your path while you're driving a car, and you swerve to avoid them, and then you look back and think, who did that? And I know you don't want to admit this, but have you ever been thinking about something else and driving, and you find yourself 5 miles from where you started, right in the place you ended up, you wanted to end up, and you have no idea how you got there, and no one's dead behind you because you did it? You were using this one pathway without consciously perceiving the world that you were acting on. There's even an auto one showing you how information percolates around the brain in weird ways. Steepness of hill illusion. Anybody who's a skier or a runner or a cyclist knows that you overestimate the steepness of hills. I started skiing 10 years ago. I got up to the top of the slope and I looked down and said, oh crap, this is a cliff, I'm going to die. I guess that's what the green circle means, really hard slope. And then a 2-year-old goes by me on skis and goes right down the slope, fine, okay? You always overestimate the steepness of hills. So take a bunch of people, put them at the bottom, and don't ask the question, how steep is the hill? They answer you in 3 ways. Verbal, tell me what angle it is, 30 degrees, 20 degrees. Visual, set a little protractor here by looking at it to the steepness of the hill. Haptic, reach into this darkened box where you can't see and use your wrist muscle to set the protractor to the steepness of the hill. Here's the real steepness of the hill. When you ask them how steep it is, they overestimate it by a factor of 2. When they set a protractor looking at it, they overestimate it by a factor of 2. But when you ask them to use their wrist muscle blind, they're dead on. All of the people had the same information at this hill. Somewhere in your brain, without you knowing it, you knew the steepness of the hill, but only your wrist muscle. By the way, if you get tired people, they overestimate by a factor of 4, but this way you're still dead on. So the information is there in all sorts of ways. Now some specific deficits that tell us how very specific behaviors are encoded in the brain. Again, vision, object recognition. The nerve cells here that recognize objects project up here to your speech center. Let you do a very specific thing you think is just part and parcel of your whole personality. Tell me what this is when you see it. What happens when you destroy it? This happens in stroke. You get a very spooky syndrome called anomia, the inability to name an object that you look at. This is an actual transcript of a woman being shown a handsaw. It's a I'm not stating it correctly. If you go to the woods, you take one of these and cut the wood, I know what it is. Perfectly verbal, no problem with language. It's a and the doctor tries to help her out by using the same word in a different context. Hey, I saw one of those yesterday. Oh, so did I. It's a I can't get it out. Show her a piece of wood and she'll say, use a saw to cut that. Let her touch the saw where her eyes are closed, that's a saw. She's lost one thing, the ability to say the name of an object. There are patients who've done this in one language and not more. That's how specific the functions are. Another thing that keeps you alive really well, recognizing faces. You've got to get away from someone, you've got to be attracted to other ones if you're going to stay alive and mate. The face recognition area is right here in the temporal lobe. You put a magnet over it right on the side of the head. Turn it on, all of a sudden the person can't recognize faces. Turn it off, they can recognize people. Would criminals love to be able to do this by remote control? No more eyewitnesses. Well, we're not very far away from that ability. Something else you do with faces, you attach emotion to it. You think, oh, that's magic, I see a face, now I have emotion attached to it. No, that's a specific neural connection in one part of your brain. It goes from the face recognition area here, down underneath to the emotional centers of the brain. Could that be disrupted? Yes, it happens in traumatic brain injury. It's not common, but it happens. It's called Capgras syndrome, the ability to attach emotion to faces. These people come back from the hospital, their mother comes in to take care of them, and they say, you look just like my mom, you're not my mom. Somebody's hired you. You want my money. The government is trying to hire an imposter. Here's an actual transcript. Patient, he looks exactly like my father, and he really is. He's a nice guy, but he isn't my father. He's talking about his father. He's sitting next to him. Doctor, well, why was this man pretending to be your father? Well, that's what's so surprising. Why would anyone want to pretend to be my father? Maybe my real father employed him to take care of me. Maybe he gave him some money. Shows him a picture of himself. A couple of years earlier, he has a mustache. That's another me. He looks identical to me, but it's not me. Because they can't attach emotion to the face. Now, how do we know that's a brain problem, not just some psychological oddness? Because you can measure emotion. You can measure galvanic skin response, lie detector, right? When people experience emotion, they sweat. These people do not respond with sweating or pupil dilation to familiar faces. They don't attach emotion to them, but they know what they look like, they can match them. If you send the parent out of the room and the parent calls the patient on the phone, the patient says, oh, hi, Dad. It's only for vision. Very, very tiny, specific part of the brain that makes you do something you think is very complicated. And just for you, today, Top dressing appears all the time in movies. They're called zombies. It's not the zombies aren't zombies, it's the people who think they're zombies. So I've dug up for you for the first time, just kidding, the actual film of a doctor diagnosing top dressing. Just for you, I'll probably need your help to turn this on again. This is from Invasion of the Body Snatchers, or as we call it, Invasion of the Stomach Snatchers. Can we run this thing?
Nice to see you.
In this movie, the plant pods are taking over people and substituting brains.
It's him. He's your outlier.
He is not.
How is he different?
That's just it. There is no difference you can actually see. He looks, sounds, acts, and remembers like other life.
Maybe he is wrong. Can't you see that? No matter how you feel, he is.
But he isn't. There's something missing. He's been a father to me since I was a baby. Always when he talked to me, there was a special look in his eye. That look's gone.
What about memories? There must be certain things that only you and he would know about.
I've talked to him about them. He remembers them all down to the last small detail, just like I'm going to would. There's no emotion. None. Just the pretense of it. Words, gesture, the tone of voice, everything else is the same, but not the feeling. Memories or not, he isn't my Uncle Ira.
I'm on your side. My business is keeping control, and I'm going to find a way to help you. Now, no one could possibly impersonate your outlier without you or your activity or even me seeing a million little differences. I want you to realize that. Think about it. Then you'll know that the trouble is inside you.
Top dressing. So in the last 20 seconds or so, I'd like to end just with how far we've gotten. I talked about face recognition for a few moments, but there's an interesting phenomenon, an experiment that's been done in monkeys. You know, if you have two different images coming into your two eyes, you never fuse them. You switch between them like those cubes you couldn't see. Turns out monkeys do the same thing. And what they've done is they put a barrier here in front of the monkey and they've given it two different images, always constant. And the monkey's been trained to push a button when he sees a face. And so they give a face to one eye and something else to the other eye, and the monkey just sits there and periodically, consciously, suddenly switches to seeing the face. Nothing has changed going into the monkey's brain except the monkey's conscious perception. And these researchers discovered individual nerve cells in the brain that turned on exactly when the monkey pushes the button. So nothing's changing coming into the brain. That is a nerve cell that's encoding the conscious perception of a face. And that's how far we are now. All of these phenomena I've been talking about the different functions of specific parts of the brain and how they operate. Most of these have been taken almost now down to the level of single neurons. So the idea I'd like to leave you with is we're a lot closer than most people think in understanding how the brain gives us consciousness, and the answers are surprising. And to keep an eye on where this field will go next year is going to have a huge impact on society. Thank you.